Okay, so let us begin, friends. This is the third video in the for the paper GS1 2014. We have already covered two videos in which we have covered questions of modern India, art and culture, and world history. In this video, as you can see, we will be discussing 5 questions from Indian society and 3 questions from the geography part. Overall, there were 10 questions in geography part in 2014, but to make the videos of shorter length, I have distributed them into two videos. This video contains 3 questions and the next video will contain 7 questions of geography. Okay, before I begin, I want to mention something about the Indian society part. Now, see, society is one such section. UPSC has laid a lot of focus on this section ever since the pattern has changed. And the questions which UPSC asks in this segment are not very tough, but at the same time, they are not very easy as well. What students generally face an issue, the kind of issue they face in society questions is there is too much content. A number of times they have too much content in society questions. But what the problem they face, the consequent problem that they face is they are not able to organize that content. This is a difficult thing. Eventually, what happens is students start writing in paragraphs. Okay, so this is the approach they tend to follow because of lack of a better option. However, there are a number of better ways of writing or approaching questions of Indian society. For example, you can use flowcharts, you can use numbers and figures. Okay, then you can also use web diagrams. Okay, then you can make tables. You can use text boxes, as I've already mentioned in the previous approach also. Okay, so these are some ways of making your answer look more presentable. Now, this better presentation does two things, one for you, one for the examiner. For you, it gives a structure to your answer. If you already have made a web diagram at the side of your answer, from there you can easily proceed as to how you will continue writing the answer. And for the examiner, it makes easy for him to understand your answer. Okay, now why I say this, because society in particular is such a topic where you have the liberty to go slightly creative in comparison to other topics, be it GS1, GS2, 3 or 4. In society, it's an open-ended topic. They will ask you questions about status of women empowerment. They will ask you questions about urbanization. I agree there are a number of reports and data you can use over there. That is always there. But what what you can do in society is you can gain an edge over a competition in the case of Indian society by writing your answers in a better manner. In fact, I also want to say that there are certain topics in society, if you make a template approach as to how to approach particular questions, you can do much better in society. It will even save your time in GS1. For example, there are 3 topics which UPSC particularly mentions: secularism, regionalism, then communalism. And you can almost be sure that from all the 3 topics, UPSC has asked a question in every year. 2014, I'll just point it out for you. 2013, 2014, then 2015 again from regionalism, 2016 again from regionalism. In fact, 2 questions in 2016, 2017 from communalism. So you can see that every year one question will come from each of these 3 topics. I am planning to make a separate video on how to approach these 3 topics in a template manner. Similarly, other topics of society, which are globalization, urbanization, poverty, and population. One question will definitely come from each of these topics. Then the third part in society is, according to me, women and related issues. So one question or even 2 questions come from this topic. In fact, in 2014, 3 questions came from women and related issues topics. Okay, so we will be doing an exercise where we will be coming out with a template way of approaching Indian society questions to make your answer look much more presentable than how they are right now. Okay. Anyways, you'll better be able to understand the approach I'm talking about through the answer structures and the approaches I've mentioned in the further questions. Okay, and apart from that, as I told you earlier, in this video we'll be discussing 3 questions of geography also. Those 3 questions are from climatology part, one from uh, climatology and 2 from geomorphology. Okay, so let us begin. The first question in society. Yeah, and before I begin, one very important thing which I want to reiterate again. I told this in the previous video, also in 2013 video. I told you that whenever you are dealing with a question from Indian society, which constitutes a social issue, or it is related to a vulnerable section of society. By vulnerable section, I hope you understand what I mean, which includes top issues of women, elderly, or drug addicts, transgenders, children. Okay, if any of these sections is asked in the question, or it's a social issue, for example feminization of agriculture, or let's say the above question as it's talking about the impact on middle class working women in India. Okay, so whenever a social issue is highlighted, you without fail, without bothering about what is the action word, what is the question asking actually about, you will definitely be giving a way forward or a way ahead, which should state that how should the government proceed, or how should what steps the government should take to alleviate the sufferings of so and so vulnerable section, or to resolve this particular social issue. Way forward should form a quintessential part of your answer. You cannot afford to miss that, because if you are simply talking about the social issue, even if the action word is comment, or even if the action word is discuss, or if the action word is elaborate, you have to give a way forward. If you're not giving a way forward, you will definitely be losing certain marks, because you are only highlighting the problem without giving a solution, and that is not the quality of an administrator. Okay, so anyways, we will begin now. How does patriarchy impact the position of middle class working women in India? So there are two keywords which as you can easily identify. One is patriarchy, second is middle class working women. So as generally the way I proceed, identify the topic from the question, using that topic make an introduction, then focus on the body. So the introduction part is simple over here, because the topic of the question is patriarchy, and we are simply trying to identify the impact of it on middle class working women. So introduction should comprise of the definition of patriarchy in very brief manner, and how patriarchy can be seen in Indian society. The main body of the question should be its impact on middle class working women in India. Here you can be creative. As I was talking about earlier, how can you be creative over here? You can be creative by, there are a number of ways of writing this. You can either write in paragraph, or you can write in points, or you can make a flow chart. In this case, I have made a flow chart in the model answer. In the answer structure, I have tried to make a flow chart just to give you an idea what are the different ways of presenting an answer. From there you can get another ideas also. Okay, and as I told you earlier, since this is a social issue, so you will write a way ahead. If you are not able to write a way ahead, then you should write what are the government schemes which are in operation, and which all ministries are operating those schemes, as the conclusion of your answer. Okay, this is very important. Remember, in social issue scheme, in fact, in even in GS2, when we are talking about topics like poverty or NGOs or self-help groups, okay, over there as well, health, education, over there as well, you should remember government schemes. That is where your preparation for preliminary exam will come in use. All right, so we'll come to the answer now. So the answer structure, introduction, I told you earlier, patriarchy is a social structure in India in which male dominate in most of the aspects. Some reflections of patriarchy in India are dowry, sex ratio, adverse sex ratio, in fact, Okay. Then women in politics, the number is less. Female labor force participation rate. There was a report, in fact, in 2016. You can use that, which showed a drastic decrease in the number of female labor force participation rate in India, particularly in the urban areas, etc. Now, the body of the question I have showed you through this flowchart over here. Okay, this flowchart, you can see, as I've done, I've divided it into three parts: women at home, women at work, and women from home to work when they are traveling from home to work. So how the patriarchy is affecting their position. At home they have dual pressure because they have to work for the household work as well. Second, childcare is also their responsibility. Household chores is also their responsibility. Their income is also considered as only additional income. At the same time, they are not even paid at for domestic work. You can write that nil income for domestic work. At work, the jobs are low paying jobs. So first point. Second, they have to forego promotions due to dual pressure, or because sometimes they take maternity leave, so the superiors get a chance to say to them that you are not eligible for a promotion because you had taken so and so leave. Then leave, they have to sometimes even leave job after childbirth. All right, so these are some issues which women face at home and at work. While traveling from home to work, they also face the safety issues, and this is also because the patriarchal social structure is against them. All right, so these are some issues I have identified. So this is the way I have presented this answer. You can choose a separate way also, you can make points also, but this is, in my opinion, a good way of presenting an answer because I have divided the body into three parts: at home, from home to work, and at work. All right, and when I'm talking about the final part of the answer, we should talk about what are the government schemes which the government has bought out for working women. One is Indira Gandhi Matritva Sahayog Yojana, which is now been replaced by Pradhan Mantri Matra Vandana Yojana. Okay, second is Maternity Benefits Act and its amendment of 2017. You should talk about that as well. Okay, there are more schemes. I'm just giving you an idea as to how you should structure your answer. All right, I hope it is clear. We'll move to the next question now. Why do some of the most prosperous regions of India have an adverse sex ratio for women? Give your arguments. Now, the topic in this question is sex ratio. Before I discuss the approach for this question, I want to focus on something else. Sex ratio is a topic which has been trending in UPSC GS1 from too many years now. So, since the exercise that we are doing is to understand the pattern of UPSC. So the learning we can take from here is that if we can memorize certain numbers for sex ratio, they can come in really handy as far as UPSC papers are concerned. Okay, even for prelims examination, UPSC can ask certain numbers of sex ratio, and those numbers you should be preparing using 2011 census. Now there are certain numbers which I urge you to memorize. One is the sex ratio, national sex ratio at birth. Okay, then child sex ratio, then regions which show adverse sex ratio regions, which are primarily Punjab, Haryana. Then sex ratio figures with respect to religion. Okay, what is the sex ratio of Sikhs, Hindus, Jains, Muslims, Christians? Okay, accordingly, similarly, one more figure which I also want you to memorize is the sex ratio among scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, because this was question which came in the next year. Okay, in 2015 this question was asked. Now all these numbers are will be useful to you. There are not too many numbers. One thing I also want you to remember is in sex ratio at birth, you should remember a pattern also, that is numbers of 1991, 2001, and 2011. So you can here, they can be used for a comparison. You can make a flow chart. Okay, now coming to the question. Why I say this, because again, if you're not talking without numbers, not using numbers in the answer, then your arguments will sound very vacant. okay, without any backing. Now, coming to the question, why do some of the most prosperous regions of India, this is one keyword, most prosperous regions of India, okay, this is probably talking about Punjab and Haryana because per capita income is very high of these two states, have an adverse sex ratio for women. Sex ratio is a topic, give your arguments. Okay, I told you earlier, since this is an issue, a women-based issue, so you have to give way forward and government schemes, whatever you know. Introduction, definition of sex ratio, give numbers, draw a chart, reasons of low sex ratio, and way forward. So the approach is simple. The breaking of the answer is also relatively simple. Okay. We will be following ditto same approach when we will be approaching the question in 2015, where we have to compare the sex ratio between scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. All right. Coming to the answer, in the introduction part, you have to mention the sex ratio is the ratio of males to females in a population. Sex ratio for prosperous regions like Punjab and Haryana is staggeringly low. This is a small chart I have shown. Haryana is 879 and Punjab is 895 as per 2011 census. Okay, the figures have changed, but you should be using standard figure of 2011. All right. Now, the reasons for this, although there is no definite logic behind this, but again, there are some reasons: misuse of technology, because these regions are prosperous, so they have access to technology, which is why they are misusing the same technology. These regions have agrarian background, so consequently, agrarian mindset says that it's better to have a male child rather than having a female child, which is why female feticide and infanticide are very common here. Then dowry issues. This is a reason which you can apply in almost all the or in pan India. Migration of males to such prosperous regions. Now this is something also which is an indirect reason, because there are certain males which are migrating to these regions. So if you calculate the overall sex ratio, it becomes low because there are males coming from other regions as well. And patriarchal attitude. Again, this is a feature of Indian society in general. Okay, so there are 4 or 5 reasons which you can mention. And then way forward, what the government has done, what the government can do. There are certain schemes which are being run by the government. You have to mention those schemes: Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, Dhanalakshmi scheme, whereby cash incentives are given to people for having female children. Stringent implementation of PCPNDT Act is required so that misuse of technology is avoided, is discouraged. Then Sukanya Samriddhi Yojana is also being run. This was launched along with Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao scheme. Okay, so there are 3 or 4 schemes. In any question of sex ratio, you can simply just jot these down. All right, is it clear? I have not done much in the question, but the answer looks very presentable only because I have used a flowchart and I have also talked about the way forward, even though the question never asks you what steps the government has taken or what steps the government can take. All right, now coming to the next question. The life cycle of a joint family depends on economic factors rather than social values. Okay, discuss. Now, the keywords in this question are life cycle of a joint family, economic factors, social values. There are 2 ways of approaching this question again. First of all, according to me, you cannot directly identify the topic from the question, but indirectly it is hinting at globalization, because globalization is the major factor which has changed the institution of family in India. Okay, so the topic in this question is globalization, and this is how you will be able to give your reasons for the breakage of joint family in India. Now, secondly, as I was talking earlier, there are 2 ways of approaching this question. The first way is simply starting by defining joint family and how it is, how it reflects and has been reflected in Indian society, how the Indian culture has generally seen joint families since time immemorial. The second part of the question, simply start talking about why are joint families breaking down these days, and that way you will address your answer. Okay, but I have not followed that approach. I have added one more part over here, the second part. I have written how joint families conventionally were, and then I have related the same thing to how joint families contemporarily are. Now, what I have done here is, let's understand the approach. What I have done here is, before I tell you about the present, I have linked it to the past. Okay. Now this exercise essentially gives a logical flow to your answer. And believe me, I will be using this approach time and again in many other answers, even in geography, even in history, particularly in history, and very commonly in society questions. What this does is, even when you're writing in paragraphs, if you are writing with a background and then proceeding on to writing what is currently happening, that will link your answer, give a very good linkage to your answer. All right, and then ending on a positive note. Okay, this is also very important. Ending on a positive note is also very important. Now we'll just see on the answer structure now. Introduction. What is a joint family? It is an extension of nuclear family. India is traditionally a society of joint families. Conventionally, it was a product of social values. What were the social values which were reflected in India conventionally? India had collectivistic societies. Economic and social dependence were some of the reasons, which is why people wanted to stay together. The habitat was primarily rural. Okay, that is also, and the workforce was primarily engaged in agriculture, which was dependent on too many people. So they had to stay together, which is why the joint family was conventionally a product of social values. However, contemporarily, India has been facing the wave of globalization ever since India opened its borders in 1991. So, globalization has not only affected the economy of country, it has also affected the society of the country, and in society, it has majorly affected the families of the country. Now, Now, globalization is indirectly the economic factors. How contemporarily joint family is a product of economic factors. Now, go back to the question which I discussed in 2013 when I was talking about globalization's impact on elderlies in India. Over there, also, I had told you certain things that whenever you are considering globalization, there are certain key words which you need to consider. And using those keywords, you can easily frame your answer on any question, even when we will be discussing the question of impact of globalization of women in India in the coming paper 2015 paper. Over there also we will be following a similar approach whereby we shall be linking globalization with certain keywords, and using those keywords we will be forming the answer. So one of the keywords I told you is individualism. Then I told you about materialism, consumerism culture, culture of consumption, as certain newspapers put it, has also risen. Okay, now all these things, then migration is also a characteristic of globalization because people are now migrating to urban centers. Money has become the primary driving force for any activity. This is again because of globalization. Okay, now how these factors have impacted joint families, it's very easy to write now. Because societies have become individualistic, so they are migrating to urban centers. They want to live alone, they want to stay away from their families, and they want to have their own homes. Because of materialism and because of consumerism culture, they have become more selfish, and people want to have everything for themselves. Money has become the primary driving force, which is why brothers are fighting with their own brothers and they are separating. Okay, so from here I think you can easily frame an answer, right? Understood? This is what I was talking about when I'm talking about a flow. From here to here, you can essentially make a flow chart. Okay, now we'll move on to the next question. Yeah, this was the question I was talking about in the beginning. This is again uh, women issue, and so in this question we will definitely be writing the way forward. What should be done? Discuss the various economic and socio-cultural forces which are driving increasing feminization of agriculture in India. All right. So the topic in this question is feminization of agriculture. It's very clear from the question. The main body of the question should consist of what are the various economic and socio-cultural forces. Then way forward, because feminization of agriculture has its fallouts. So we also need to give a way forward, as this is an issue for women in India. Now, I told you in 2013 examination also, and I'm telling you again, whenever the economic survey has talked about a certain topic, you should quote the economic survey. as much as possible. Even in El-Nino, we'll talk about, I will again be giving you this hint that you should always quote the economic survey. Okay. Coming to the answer structure, introduction, what is feminization of agriculture? Relative percentage of women increases in the agriculture sector. This phenomenon is known as feminization of agriculture. What are the reasons for the same? There are many reasons. I have jotted down 4 reasons: male migration to urban areas, suicide by male farmers due to distress, farm distress, females being uneducated and unskilled, they are forced to take agrarian jobs. Then there is lack of rural industrialization, rural development in India, which is why again women have to work in agricultural jobs. Okay. Now, but has feminization been successful in India? It has not been successful because women essentially lack ownership over land, and they do not even have direct support from the government. So what the government can do in such cases is, the government can provide direct support to the women farmers. They can make it mandatory that the ownership of water connection, land, then credit to women, which will provide them with agricultural inputs ready at their hand. It will become easy for them to access all the agricultural inputs. Okay. And then they can also promote SHGs, through which they can promote cooperative farming, and not only improve socio-economic condition of the women farmer, but also improve the agricultural output of the country. All right. So this is a way forward. Now, the again the content over here is less important. What is more important is breaking down the answer and not missing on the way forward. Now this is the way forward, and this way forward, for information, I have taken from economic survey. This is what the economic survey of 2016, 15, 16 talked about as to how feminization of agricultural and related issues can be resolved. All right. So just over here, when you're writing as per the economic survey 2015-16, there are certain measures which should be taken in order to resolve the issues in relation to feminization of agriculture. All right. I hope it is very clear to you. Okay. This list is not exhaustive over here. The reasons I mentioned, you can mention more reasons as well. You can even mention the number of suicides committed in a particular year. You can also mention the literacy rate of women in rural areas. Then you can also mention the number of males migration to urban areas. Okay, there are a number of options you can do that. That will only give you extra marks. Okay, moving on. This is the last question of Indian society. As I've told you, that UPSC generally always asks one question from the topic of secularism, regionalism, or communalism. It does not miss that. So similarly, in this year, UPSC has asked a question on secularism. All right. It was a very simple question. The answer for this you can easily find in the NCERT book. Okay. Uh, you just had to break the answer into appropriate parts. Now, coming to the question, how do Indian debates on secularism differ from the debates in the West? Before I begin, I just want to mention one thing. As I told you earlier, there are 3 topics: secularism, communalism, and regionalism. In these 3 topics, you always should be prepared with certain examples. If you are not writing examples or illustrations, you are simply mentioning theory, which will not make your answer very different from what others are doing. If you are using examples, then it is only then that you are linking your question to current affairs as well, and to the happenings which have recently happened. Okay, so that will help your answer to stand out. Now, I will be using examples in this question as well. All right. Now, how do the Indian debates on secularism differ from the debates in the West? So, you simply had to write about how secularism is construed in the West and how it is in India with examples. Okay. Then you have to conclude by saying how secularism of India is suiting the Indian society, because ultimately you have to praise the secularism of India. Okay, you do not have to take sides with secularism of West, because our secularism has been enshrined by our constitution, so you cannot go against it. Remember this. Okay. Similarly, when I'm talking about regionalism also, whenever you're talking about examples of Jharkhand or Chhattisgarh or Uttarakhand, or talking about examples of Telangana, okay, you can't go against these because the government has taken them. So there are certain steps, there have been certain background issues which the government has taken. That these are all positive examples. Even though, yeah, when you critically analyze the situation of these states now after they are formed, they are facing certain issues, that is there. But when you are giving examples from regionalism, these are not negative examples. What is a negative example in regionalism? Negative example regionalism is probably MNS, Maharashtra Navnirman Sena, or it is some demand which has not been, for example, the demands of Purvanchal. These are demands which are currently not being accepted by the government, and they hamper the federal nature of the country. Okay, so these are negative examples. Similarly, you have to prepare of examples in communalism. Okay, now coming back to this question on secularism. How is secularism in West? In West, state and religion are separate from each other. Okay, meaning state cannot interfere in any religion. Also, mostly there is must just one religion in the West, and that is Christianity. Okay, now the example which I've not mentioned over here is example is if a person is denied entry in a church, the state cannot do anything about it because the state and religion are separate from each other. However, in India, such a practice is prohibited under Article 15 of the Constitution of India. Now, coming to India, state has no religion of its own, but state respects all religions equally. State and religion are not entirely separate, meaning state can interfere in any religion when required. And that is how state supports inter-religious and intra-religious reforms. Okay. It follows a positive discrimination with respect to religion. Article 17, 29, and 30 are examples. How is Article 17 an example? Intra-religion reform. Untouchability is an evil practice of Hindu religion, and state has prohibited that through the constitution as well as by passing an act also, Protection of Civil Rights Act 1955. Okay, so this is an intra-religion reform. State has directly interfered in the Hindu religion in order to eliminate the practice of untouchability. Similarly, state has recently passed a bill to ban triple talaq and made it an offense as well. Okay, so this is again an example of intra-religious reform. Okay, similarly, state has taken inter-religious reforms also. Whenever state has taken uh, measures for the promotion of minorities through articles 29 and 30, promotions of minorities, their educational institutions, state is taking inter-religious reform, and it is not allowing the majority religion to dominate the minority religion. All right, so this is how the state and religion not entirely separate. I hope it is clear. Now, how has this suited our demands? This is where you conclude the answer. The constitution makers of India took into account the social milieu of India and recognized the pluralism or plural religions which India is made up of. And they also recognize that there are certain evils within the religions. That is why they came up with the idea of inter-religious and intra-religious reforms. Took a much broader and extensive connotation of secularism as compared to secularism of West. The connotation of secularism in India is much more broader. It is henceforth an embodiment of Sarvadharma Sambhav. All right. So this is a very appropriate conclusion to give to your answer. How the secularism which we have adopted suits the Indian society because we have plural religions. At the same time, we have certain evils also within the religions which needed to be eliminated. Okay. Is it clear? I hope it is clear. And if it is not clear, do mention in the comment section. I can again explain this to you, although we are planning to come out with a separate video on regionalism, communalism, and secularism in order to better explain those topics. Now we'll be discussing questions from Indian geography. Okay, this is the first question. Most of the unusual climatic happenings are explained as an outcome of the El-Nino effect. Do you agree? Now, uh, The moment you see El Nino, just put it in your mind that you have to quote the economic survey, because the economic survey has time and again talked about El Nino, its impact on agricultural and its impact on agriculture in India. Okay, it's how has El Nino related to drought in India. Then secondly, the moment you see El Nino, you should definitely think about drawing a diagram. Okay, there are two diagrams in El Nino. One diagram is explaining the phenomena, and the second diagram is showing the impact of El Nino. In this question, the question never asks you what are the factors which have led to El Nino, or explain the formation of El Nino in Southern Pacific. In that case, you have to draw the diagram of showing the phenomena of El Nino. Here, the question precisely asks you about the impact of El Nino, how El Nino impacts the unusual climatic happenings which you can see in the world are an outcome of El Nino effect. Okay, so the topic in the question is El Nino. So you start the question by defining El Nino. Don't explain the phenomena in detail. If you want to, you can explain it in brief in one or two lines. Then your main body should be unusual climatic happenings in the world and their impact also on weather and habitat. And finally, you have to draw the diagram of not showing the phenomena but showing the impact. First of all, I'll talk about the diagram. So this is the diagram. There are two, three regions which should be marked in your answer. One region is this region, Southern America, this part, how this region is impacted during El Nino. Generally, it is drier, but after El Nino, this part becomes wet and it also experiences landslides and heavy rainfall. This part is very important. Western Australia, Eastern Australia part, I'm sorry. This part, which is generally wet, it experiences dryness during El Nino years. Then this part is very important, South Asia and Southeast Asia. These parts, which generally experience monsoonal rainfall, also do not experience monsoonal rainfall in the years of El Nino. So your map should definitely talk about these four regions. Apart from that, you can talk about this region as well and this region as well. Okay, there are certain other regions which you can talk about. Now, coming to the answer structure. In the introduction, I have simply defined El Nino. It is a narrow warm current which appears off the coast of Peru in December, occurs every 3 to 4 years, and its impact usually lasts for 9 to 12 months. The unusual climatic happenings, here you can also make the subheading as unusual climatic happenings. Okay, on South America, on Australia, on Southeast Asia and South Asia, on USA and Europe. South America, I told you, rainfall happens, landslide happens, warm currents also affect fish catch of the area. On Australia, drought-like situation on East Coast. Southeast Asia and South Asia, rainfall deficiency and monsoon is affected, which in turn affects the agricultural growth and output. On USA and Europe, in USA, warmer winters, and in Europe, colder winters. Okay, so this is the impact and this is the diagram. This is the remark which I have mentioned. I just wanted to mention this, although it is not directly relate to this question. I just want to make a note, want you guys to make a note of this. While the majority of drought years in India coincide with the occurrence of El Nino, the reverse link is not that strong. Okay, what this thing means is that whenever India has faced drought, that is a year when El Nino has come. But whenever El Nino has come, it does not mean that India will be facing a drought. This the economic survey has said, and because it has studied the impact of El Nino since starting from 1990s, and through that it has said, for example, in the year 1996 and 7, I think, I don't remember exactly, El Nino was there, but India did not face a drought. Okay, similarly 1998 and 1999 also, El Nino was there, but India did not face a drought. So this is something which you can use in in some of your answers. Okay, I just want you to make a note of this. I hope it is clear. The world map is very important in this, and if you're not started practicing the world map, I suggest you start practicing that. Okay, now coming to the next question. Why are the world's fold mountain systems located along the margins of continents? This is a question of geomorphology. As you can see, in questions of geomorphology, you can almost assume diagram is a must. Geomorphology is a subject in geography in which if you do not draw a diagram and simply write points, you will not be getting marks. I can almost assure you of that. Okay. Now coming to the question, why are the world's fold mountain systems located along the margins of continents? So from this itself, you can understand that what sort of diagram should be included in this question. Then there's a second part of the question, bring out the association between the global distribution of fold mountains and earthquakes and volcanoes. Now, the question has asked two parts, and in fact, I think that there are these two are both very lengthy questions. These should have been separate questions. In geography optional, also this question has been asked separately in as a 15 marker because there are two or three diagrams which can be drawn in this question. Anyways, we will try to reduce the length of our answer. So the first part of the question should basically consist of the continental oceanic collision and the continental continental collision in a line or two. Diagram is must over here. The second part of the question, where diagram is not so important, is the association of continental oceanic collision and continental continental collision with earthquakes and volcanoes. We'll understand it better through the answer structure. I'll highlight the keywords over here for you to understand what should not be missed in this question. First is the word PTT, which stands for plate tectonics theory. This is something which cannot be missed because the entire phenomenon of formation of fold mountains in the world is explained using plate tectonics theory. According to this theory, fold mountains are associated with convergent plate boundary. This is the second keyword which should not be missed. Now, convergent plate boundaries are formed at continental oceanic collision and continental continental collision, in which, in both cases, heavier plate subducts under the lighter plate leads to formation of folded mountains. Okay. Examples you have to give in continental oceanic collision, Rockies and Andes are example. In continental collision, Himalayas are examples. All right. So this is your first part of the answer is addressed. This diagram is very important. You just can't afford to miss this. Okay, it's a very simple diagram. Now I'll just revisit for you the important keywords which should not be missed. One is plate tectonic theory, second is convergent plate boundary, third is continental oceanic, fourth is continental continental collision, fifth is examples. This is your answer. Sixth important thing is your diagram. So this is the first part of the answer. Now coming to the second part, I have drawn a diagram here, but it is not very important. This is just for an illustration for you people. Now the question asks, bring out the association between global distribution of fold mountains and earthquakes and volcanoes. So first you can simply make a heading, what is the global distribution of fold mountains? The global distribution of fold mountains is in three belts. One is Circum-Pacific belt, then it is Mid Continental belt, okay, and sorry, two belts, okay, not the third belt. Third belt is Mid Atlantic belt. This is oceanic divergence, sorry, continental divergence leading to the formation of ocean. Okay, these are two belts which account for the formation of global formation of fold mountains in the world. Okay, and only on these two belts you can find 80% of earthquakes and volcanoes. 80% of earthquakes and volcanoes are caused due to convergent plate boundary along the mid-continental belt and Circum-Pacific belt. Just to give you a better idea, what is the Circum-Pacific belt? Circum-Pacific belt is this one, and over here. Okay, and the mid-continental belt is this one. All right. So these are two belts. This diagram is not very necessary over here because this will take up too much of your time. But what you have to write is, I'll just tell you. First of all, you write global distribution of fold mountains, and then write this point: 80% of earthquakes and volcanoes are caused due to convergent plate boundary along these two belts. All right. Then you can talk about. You can also write about how the Circum-Pacific belt is known as Ring of Fire because of the earthquakes surrounding it. Then you can also name certain volcanoes in the Mid Continental Belt and in Circum-Pacific Belt. For example, Mount Erebus, Vesuvius, Etna, okay, Mount Kilimanjaro. These are included in this belt. Okay, so this completes your answer over here. You can skip this diagram, but you cannot skip this diagram. This is very important. This you can skip. This was just for you to give you an idea. Okay, I hope it is clear. We'll move on to the last question of this video. Explain the formation of thousands of islands in Indonesian and Philippines archipelago. Now, this very seldom happens that UPSC asks you two questions on geomorphology. However, in this paper, it was seen 2014 because it had 25 questions. But in the further years, you will never have. I have not seen a paper whereby UPSC has asked two questions on geomorphology, and also both questions from similar topic. Again, the topic is plate tectonics theory. So introduction is simple. This theory explains the formation of thousands of islands through oceanic collision. Okay, you can that will be your introduction. Diagram is must, as in the previous question. Oceanic crust with continental margin, and island arc is formed over here. Okay, how they are formed in Indonesia and Philippines, you can read it from this slide. I'll just highlight the keywords: oceanic convergence, denser plate subducts, rocks undergo metamorphosis, melts to form magma, magma escapes, constant volcanism, layer over layer, and volcanic mountains are formed. The mountains merge and oceanic crust gets transformed into continental crust. This is how Indonesian archipelago are formed. All right. I'll not go into the much detail of this. So I hope it is clear. In geomorphology questions, you have to particularly mention the present your answer with a diagram. That is must. If you're not doing that, you will be losing certain marks. Okay, and apart from that, yeah, this is the end of this video. If you have any comments or suggestions, you want me to discuss any particular topic in society, geography, or for that matter in any part of the GS, we can do that. Just post that in the comment section, and if you have any comments regarding this video, do that also in the comment section. Okay.